to Adjust Inc. presents If Testimony Was a Person. Today we have a guest who dropped in, and we didn't even expect to have you. But Cristina Arroyo is an activist, is a person who represents populations who are often underrepresented, and you're running for mayor of Valley Stream.
Yes, I am. Elections are March 21st. Nobody knows about that.
Welcome. I mean,
Thank you.
Yeah, it's something. I think you're right. People don't know about the election coming up, and I want to just learn a little bit about you. Cristina, where were you raised?
I was born and raised in Añasco, Puerto Rico. Actually, I was born in Ponce, but I was raised in Añasco, and that's on the western part of Puerto Rico. And it's basically I was raised and I grew up. Behind me, there was a sugarcane plantation where I rode my bike. And in my backyard, there was a mango tree, which I climbed. And 10 minutes away was the beach. So very stereotypical Puerto Rican scenery right there.
Do you still love the beach?
I was never a beach person. I was more of a, kind of like outside forest trees. There was also bamboo forest. Yeah. So I was more like that. I still love the beach. I still love going to, who doesn't?
Yeah. There's some people who love the beach more than others. I like the water, okay, but there's some people who are like, what do you mean you're not going in the water?
Yeah, no, I just chill at the beach. That's what I do.
So, and then you mentioned mango trees. Do you still love tropical fruits?
I do. Parcha, which is, I forgot what it's named in English, but it's very delicious. And they sell it here. It's sort of kind of like a peachy color, like a more bold peachy color. Passion fruit. That's what it's called. Parcha.
Right.
That's delicious. Okay. I highly recommend it. And of course, coconut. I love coconut water, coconut everything. Coquito,
So how old were you when you came to the continental U.S.?
I came to the continental U.S. when I went to college. I went to BU, Boston University. So the first time I came here to live was when I was 18.
Oh, so you were in high school in Puerto Rico.
Yes, I was.
And you got into Boston University.
Yes, I did.
Which means that you were an overachiever of sorts. You were an excellent student to be able to get into BU.
So I was like grade A student. I did all the things correctly, and I was exhausted and burnt out. I remember after high school, I told my dad, listen, I did all the things you wanted. I had the perfect grades after this. I'm going to be a little bit easier on myself.
Yeah.
And my first semester grades of college reflected that. But I picked up after.
That is a very interesting thing, because often young children who put a lot of pressure on themselves to be high achievers and to be approved of by their parents, they can either grow into adults who become a little neurotic because they continue to do that, or they can find that medium ground where they let loose some of the pressure. And so that's what you did maybe in college.
I did that a little bit. I have to say that's like a lifelong struggle that I face. I have periods in which I go really hard. To the point of, like I was telling you earlier, when I was doing my PhD, I was hospitalized and went to the hospital about 6 times in 4 years.
Wow.
Because of burnout, because of just not sleeping, because of the pressure and the anxiety around it. I would say I learned the most to relax when I quit my PhD.
Wow.
I quit it after 5 years. I finished all the classes. I finished everything. I had to write a thesis that was on actually organizational justice. It was 172 pages, I believe, 152 pages. After that thesis, I was like, you know what? I gotta quit some things.
Yeah.
I have to learn how to quit. I gotta learn how to fail in order to actually succeed later.
Right.
I redefined what success meant to me. So
Right. That's a good that's a good lesson to learn because when you use the word failure, small failures could be the metaphor could be battles versus wars, right? So
yes.
you say, all right, I'll put this battle aside in order to advance myself in the larger quote unquote war.
And a lot of times I feel like for when I was growing up and even when I was in college and when I started working, a lot of times our definitions of success are not our definitions of success. It's society's definitions of success or our community's definitions of success.
Yeah.
And it was in my late 30s when I was like, I'm going to define success on my own terms.
When was that you how old approximately were you when you stopped your PhD?
I was 37,
Okay.
I believe. Yes, I was 37, 36 or 37. So that summer. So that's one thing that it's my personality. I do everything to kind of extremes, which is good and bad. So that summer, I decided, you know what? I am extremely depressed. I am sick all the time. I am not happy. And I am exhausted and I can't. I can't. So that's in the same summer, I quit my PhD.
Yeah.
I quit my job teaching at Baruch College. I quit my marriage and I moved out.
Yeah.
So it was like brand new. I'm like, I'm just going to start everything all at once. I'm not going to say it was great. I cried for 3 months straight, literally. But it was a kind of like refresh. It's kind of like, let me let go of all the paradigms and all the expectations and really analyze where do I want to go from here, starting from scratch.
So your journey as an activist, did it kind of start when you did the refresh, or had that gone back some?
So that's a funny thing. I thought it started overtly. I thought it started when I did the refresh, and that was in 2019. But really, when I look back and I start analyzing and reflecting, I've always been doing it, but not in an overt way.
Oh, I see.
Like, I can tell you, even when I was like 11 years old in Puerto Rico, and I used to ride my bike around my town, and it has like the town plaza, the town center. And there were these kids about my age. They were skateboarding. And then the cops came and took away their skateboards. And I thought, Jesus Christ. I was like, that is so unfair. Like, in my heart.
Yeah.
That was like an injustice. I couldn't put it into words. Like, I knew it, that it didn't feel right. I didn't know these kids. I went to one of the kids who got his skateboard taken away. I was like, listen, let's go to the police station, which is right there. Because my town is, small.
Yeah.
And I was like, we'll tell them that we're brother and sister. And I'll tell them, like, mom will beat you up or, like, scold you if you come home. And I got his skateboard back. And I've always had that feeling of, this is unjust, right? And even when I was doing my PhD, I studied organizational justice and pay equity. Beforehand at work, I used to advocate for Spanish speakers at my work without even sort of knowing that that was activism. It wasn't until, even starting my PhD in IO Psych was because of activism.
Yeah.
I was working and I was pregnant and they laid me off because I was going to take maternity leave. And that is illegal, as I found out.
Right.
And I went through the EEOC and everything. And that's when I decided, this shouldn't happen to anybody else. I'm going to go study organizational justice.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. But I've always been doing it. I used to do stand-up comedy. I did it for 5 years as well.
I could see that.
And even my comedy is rooted in social criticism and advocacy. So it's a personality trait sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful that you have made your what was natural to you, the feeling that you wanted to fight for fairness, even on a small scale, like the skateboard situation, or learning through your own experience of being discriminated against essentially because you were a woman, right?
Yeah.
That you took that and made it into part of your life.
Yeah, I always thought I'm going to go to college, I'm going to learn about this, and then I'll have the very sharp tools to fight discrimination. And even doing my PhD, I remember telling all my professors in academia, like, okay, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a professor, and then I'm going to publish papers. And then it takes 2 to 5 years to publish a paper because it requires a lot of research,
Right.
right? And then it'll get published. And then 10 years from now, because they've done research on how long it takes for papers and studies to come to the mainstream, even if they come into the mainstream, it takes about 10 years. I was like, so whatever I'm studying now, people won't notice it in the mainstream and apply it to their lives till 10 years from now or 15 years from now.
Right.
And I said, I remember sitting at a conference and I told that to my professor, and I was thinking in my head, now is the time when we need social change. I can't wait 15 years. And I had that sort of like restlessness about me. And I think that's what helped me quit too. I'm like, listen, people need me now. Like the movements need people now.
Yeah.
And when I started overtly doing activism in Valley Stream, and I started specifically in the schools, you know, when you advocate for disenfranchised communities and you live, so this is the interesting part about Valley Stream. Valley Stream is insanely diverse. It's so diverse. It's amazing, right? Our leadership is not diverse. The systems aren't catered towards diversity, right? So when you start advocating for disenfranchised groups in a community that is so diverse and yet the leadership is so homogenous, you're going to get a lot of backlash, right? So when I started my activism, I got a lot of backlash, a lot. And people say, "Oh, you have a thick skin to do this." I'm like, "No, my skin is like super thin. Like I'm very sensitive, and I cry all the time, but I still do it, right?" At a certain point, I sat down with myself and I said, "Cristina, if you're gonna do this, you have to go all the way to address systems and dismantle or change or evolve systems. You can't do it part way because then it becomes performative and then it actually perpetuates the systems that are in place." Performative activism, that's what it does. So I decided that day, I was like, I'm going to go all the way. Whatever happens, happens. And I'll just take it.
Describe performative activism for the audience.
So the idea behind performative activism is that it looks on the surface like you're doing something good for either disenfranchised communities or oppressed communities, etc., right? However, you are addressing systemic issues and systemic problems in individual ways through individual channels exclusively. So let me give you an example, right? My school district right now is composed of 86% students of color. When I started advocating for teacher diversity.
What school district is this?
District 24 in Valley Stream.
Okay.
Because they didn't have a single black teacher in their staff.
Wow.
And 96% of the teachers were white. Now, yes, we do recognize that people who graduate to become teachers aren't like equitably distributed amongst the, ethnicities and races. However, the threshold is 20% teachers of color who graduate, right? So we were very far away. So I started advocating for that. There was a lot of backlash, a lot of, we can't find qualified black teachers, which is not an excuse at all. If you can find qualified teachers within even school board members' families and friends, then you can find a single qualified black teacher next to New York City.
Yeah.
So that's not an excuse, and it's actually perpetuating very racist stereotypes of black teachers in the black community. So they got a lot of backlash. They got a lot of push from me. I went to school board meetings. Then they were in the newspaper. Then, I started advocating. People started also, requesting and demanding justice in this sense. And they did something. They hired their first Black principal, which is awesome.
Yeah.
That's a great step. However, still no Black teachers, right? They said, oh, we're going to do some different recruitment strategies. I'm like, that's awesome. And they have recruited Hispanic teachers as well, which is awesome, right? But then I go to their school board meeting and I say, okay, so you did the recruitment, right? So what kind of mentorship programs or retention programs do you have for these teachers who have never been here, for these communities that have never worked here? What kind of retention programs do you have? And what kind of mentorship and growth programs do you have? Because you can't apply the same ones that were there before. Because what happens usually in organizations is you attract and recruit people who are of color in homogenous organizations, and then they either self-select out, which means that they quit, or they're pushed out because the protocols and the systems in there are not designed for them. They were actually designed to exclude them. So they said to me, oh, we don't have any. It's just, we don't have any formal ones. We just do them. I'm like, so you don't have anything. So that addresses the idea of performative activism, which is kind of like window dressing, which is like, hey, we have this Black teacher. Look at all the diversity we have. But are you taking care of this? Did you adjust your systems? Did you change your systems for this?
I'm thinking of a school district, which I won't name, in Long Island that I know of, that had a woman who was involved in the arts department, and the self removal that you're talking about, just opting out. She eventually left, and I talked to her and asked her why she left. Highly qualified, brought a lot, I believe, to the school, and she described almost exactly what you just said. Just was feeling like the systems and the things that were in place there really didn't make her feel particularly comfortable. So she went and found a position that did.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part, because this is like when I talk about systemic discrimination, systemic inequities, I'm not talking about individual discrimination. Those are very two different things that have very different dynamics and mechanisms. So the interesting thing is that people say, oh, then, suggest people that, or recommend people that can come in and help you guys out and come in and be hired, people of color. And I say to them, well, before I recommend people, I actually talk to them and I tell them, listen, if you're hired here, it's not going to be easy for you. You're going to be battling a system that was designed to keep you out.
Yeah.
So it's a lose-lose situation. If you don't get the job, you lose. If you get the job, there's a lot of emotional labor and cognitive labor that you have to do that nobody else has to do there.
Right.
And then your work starts to suffer, right? Because all this kind of labor takes away from the labor that you actually have to do. So you have to do even more work. And then you're evaluated differently. It's a whole cumulative disadvantage situation.
That is brilliantly said.
Thank
It's
you.
So true. You come in to do a job, but if the emotional baggage and the thinking that has to go with everything that you do is heavy, then it takes away from what you actually are there to do.
Yeah. And then it reinforces their narrative all along of, oh, we couldn't find any qualified teachers. Well, you were giving them more work with fewer resources.
Yeah.
So that's the tough part.
Yeah. So what are some of the other things? And by the way, the backlash that you talked about was, I don't want you to name anybody, but is this a school board that you were getting the backlash from?
The backlash comes from the people, not only in leadership positions within these systems, right? but also the people who support these systems.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not only like, let's say, it's not only like the people with like leadership roles and titles. It's everyone else who benefits from these systems. Obviously, the backlash from leadership is very different from the backlash from my neighbors or even some of the people I used to call my friends. And even like recently running for mayor, that's the toughest part. I knew I was going to get backlash from the people who don't agree with me. I knew that. And you know what? I've had practice. But from friends and people who you thought were going to support you, that's the toughest part. And I never heal from that, I feel. Because I'm very idealistic, although I'm very realistic about what's happening. But I read a quote somewhere, and I don't remember who said it. I'll look it up later, but they said, when you're fighting for justice, the people who are against you will be against you. The people who are with you will fight against you. And the people you're fighting for will also fight against you. And that is so true. Because you're disenfranchised, right? Only because you belong in these groups that have been oppressed historically for so long doesn't mean that you haven't internalized that racism, that homophobia, that sexism.
Absolutely.
And that's how it keeps perpetuating. We have internalized it. I have it inside me. I have it in my blood from the Spanish colonizers, and I have it inside me from growing up in a still colonized Puerto Rico, and from living in the United States in a place that is so diverse and yet so regressive with its consciousness. Yeah.
In fact, I would say that by its very nature, oppression and disenfranchisement causes those who are the victims of it to internalize some of it and to, believe some things that would be clearly unhealthy. Like if we could remove ourselves from the situation and be anthropologists looking in, we'd say, well, these individuals that are clearly being mistreated seem to believe some of the messages, and they even say some of the messages that are from the oppressing group. Right?
Yes, and that I think that has to do with a lot of reasons psychologically, but one of the biggest reasons is kind of like the anxiety around like having intersecting identities that are oppressed. Because imagine if you woke up every day and thought about discrimination, sexism, whatever your identities are that are disenfranchised or oppressed, and you thought about it and you were hyper aware of them every time, you wouldn't be able to do anything. You would be paralyzed and traumatized. And that's the tough part. And I think that it's funny because people are like, wow, you talk about this all the time. Aren't you tired of talking about it? I'm like, I'm more tired of living it.
Yeah.
I'm more tired of seeing other people living it. Imagine what they feel like, I was talking to this person and we were talking about sexism specifically. And he was saying some things that I realized that he wasn't very aware of what was going on. And I said to him, I have a question for you. How many times have you had really a conversation about sexism? And he said, a lot. And I was like, how many times in your life? And he said, like 4 or 5 times. And there's the gap.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I talk about this every day. Because at the time, I also used to teach psychology of gender at Baruch College. And I'm like, I talk about these topics every single day of my life. And there's the gap because he didn't think that people talked about this every day or even experienced it every day. So when I speak to people about my advocacy and activism around schools, or even now around running for mayor, as the first woman to ever run for mayor, as the first person of color to ever run for mayor in Valley Stream, as the first Latina to ever run for mayor, it's 2023. So you can imagine, it's not a coincidence that no other people like me have ran for mayor.
Yeah.
It's systemic. So when I tell people, oh, this happened to me when I was, today, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe that happens. I'm like, dude, it happens every day. So because of that reason, I'm having some documentarians do a documentary on my run for Mayor and Valley Stream so that
Good.
people see what this is, and it's going to be it's going to be more a reflection of racial relations and a microcosm. Valley Stream is a microcosm of what's happening in the United States.
Yeah.
So that's going to be another project.
Yeah. No, it's excellent because, our voices need to be memorialized. Even in this moment, running for mayor, we don't want it to go away like it never happened, right? So it's great that you're documenting it.
So that's funny that you say that, because you tapped into something that is my greatest fear. Like, people say, aren't you afraid that people are going to be mean to you or say lies about you or, harass your children, which has happened?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I'm afraid of those things, but that's not my greatest fear. My greatest fear is that I do all this work, which is, by the way, this is not a hobby. This is a lifestyle,
Right.
I'll do it till I die, which it might be close. My greatest fear is you do all this work and then nobody notices and nothing happens. That is my greatest fear. A lot of people think, oh, you're running for mayor, so your definition of success is winning. And I'm like, no, that's not my definition of success for mayor. Because my goals aren't just to win, right? That is one of the parts of it. That would be great. But my greater success running for mayor is, first of all, to push the boundaries of who can run and what can run, and kind of push it so that it's easier for people after me. I was knocking on doors. I've been knocking on doors nonstop. And this family opens this door and they had 2 little girls. And I said, hi, I'm Cristina. I'm running for mayor. And one of the little girls, who was 7, she says, you're running for mayor? I was like, yep. And she's like, and you're a girl? I was like, yes, I'm the first girl running for mayor in Valley Stream. And she was so happy about that. And I was so sad because I'm like, it's 2023. This shouldn't be a thing.
Yeah.
So my definition says is pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Now for her, that is a potential career or potential that she can do in her future. And it wasn't there before, I assume, because she was surprised.
Or if
right?
she has a friend who
Yes.
who's an advocate, an activist, who wants to get into politics, she won't say, that's not what ladies do.
Exactly.
Right.
And I have an 11-year-old girl, and she has told me, listen, Mom, I'm teaching all my friends about, these gender roles and things like that. My other, definition of success as running for mayor is to turn out the vote. We have very low voter turnout, and that is not just by happenstance. That's also not a coincidence. That is, that's the legacy of the history of Valley Stream, how not diverse it once was. And it's also reflective of, since it's become diverse in the past 20 years, of how these leadership roles and this decision-making and influential positions are safeguarded and have been built through years of just segregation, right? So if we increase voter turnout, civic participation is, they have the power, but we have the numbers, and that's some power there. And we have voice, so that's another form of power.
2017, Valley Stream was voted top place in New York State to live.
Yes.
And it did occur to me that many people of color come to Valley Stream to not be far from Queens and Brooklyn, where they hail from, yet to have this safer environment. But then when getting here, forgetting that the representation in Valley Stream needs to represent the numbers that you talked about of people who are actually here now. Because I think, as you stated, the leadership does not reflect the population in terms of gender or age or
Or
color
political stance
or
or
right,
ethnicity
that too.
or language.
Correct. All
I
of the
could,
above.
or sexual orientation, gender, all these things. But here's what a lot of people don't understand, right? I talk a lot about all these issues of systemic inequities. Just because I'm saying there's systemic inequities in Valley Stream doesn't mean I hate Valley Stream. Doesn't mean that Valley Stream doesn't have great things that is
Absolutely.
already offering.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's why we're coming here. That's why I live here still with my children. This is where my children are growing up. So that's the idea that a lot of people think, well, if you hate it here, then go back to where you came from. And I get that all the time. And that's a very racist statement, a xenophobic statement. Yes.
It's childish even.
Yes.
It's not even an adult way to think, because the idea of democracy, the idea of pluralism and having different voices is that within our community, we in fact have different points of view and we encourage it, right? So if you say, just go back, just get out then if you don't want to be here. No, I didn't say I didn't want to be here.
Exactly.
I said I wanted to make it better.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I keep thinking about this a lot. And I haven't really read a lot about this, but the idea of the isms like racism, sexism, I think it all boils down to a lack of imagination. And that includes a lack of imagination of people saying to me like, well, if I were him, I would have done this. I'm like, but imagine living and growing up how that person grew up, or imagine doing the things or working in the places they can't imagine themselves in somebody else's shoes. But also the lack of imagination, lack of diversity in any decision-making body is just lack of imagination as to what you can do, what you can imagine your town to be. Like, I keep telling people, I was like, it's not that Valley Stream is terrible. We have great things. I tell them, like, when you vote, I want you to think first, what if, right? And not just what if, like, we get our streets paved and we get good sanitation, because we already have that. And those are, like, the things that we have that are amazing. And yes, we have, like, a great Hendrickson Park. And we have great programs in Henderson, etc. But go further. Be more creative, Like, what if Valley Stream is the place where you tell your friends, hey, let's come to Valley Stream to hang out at night, and you don't have to convince them, Like, what if Valley Stream Village can provide more help towards working parents? What if their summer programs can be scheduled also around working parents? What if Valley Stream Village can provide a place for schools to host their pre-K programs instead of contracting them out? There are so many, like, what if we can have a Bad Bunny cover band for the summer concert series? Like, it could be anything. Like,
Absolutely.
anything that you can imagine, we can do. We just have to figure out how to implement it. And it doesn't mean that we're taking away from something else to do something. All these things strengthen every community. And that's what I tell people. I was like, when you're fighting for justice and equality, and more important, equity, right? I'm not just going to fight for Latinas, right? I'm not just going to fight for women, because my liberation, right, is contingent on everyone's liberation.
Right.
I cannot be free and be able to be a full human being with full human rights if Black women aren't, if gay people don't have rights, if Muslim people don't have rights. You cannot be free unless we're all free.
That is a great place to leave it. This forum is here for you to come back to.
Thank you so much.
Cristina Arroyo, running for mayor of Valley Stream, an advocate and a person who wants to see equity and change for all. Thank you, Cristina. If people want to get in touch with your campaign, or you on social media, or anyhow, do you have a website or?
Yes, I have a website. It's Cristina4office.com. You can also find me on Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. Just look my name, Cristina Arroyo, or Cristina for Mayor, and you'll find me. I have a lot of social media presence, and I even have my phone number over there. So honestly, if you need anything, text me or call me. I'm available to talk. I love it.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. Like, subscribe, and share for more content about what's happening locally, what's happening in mental health, and everything that affects us. If testimony was a person, signing off, have a great day.